Should you max out on weighted dips or go super heavy? My answer is yes, and this is becoming common with the rise of street lifting, a weighted calisthenics sport that focuses on one-rep max dips and pull-ups. Here, the average competitor dips well over 100 kilograms on the daily, and interestingly, injury rates remain low, probably because most of these athletes are natural, as the drug scene hasn't exploded in this relatively new sport yet. So this fact actually presents an argument for maxing out on dips. Rather than tearing pecs due to the deeper weighted stretch, which we don't see in the real world, it actually strengthens the tendons, enabling one to handle any extended range of motion press moving forward. The end stretch range of a dip is similar to a pec deck or fly, still in your active range, but now overloaded, which develops crazy tissue capacity. So when talking about getting hurt, the real argument against dips might be the potential stress on the sternum, but that's usually a structural issue affecting around 1 in 4 unlucky lifters. And the shoulders, well, they might be more sensitive due to the anterior shifting, but this sensitivity can be reduced by building mobility through proper progressive loading and good form, especially by pausing the bottom, which drastically lowers injury rates since all momentum is cut out and you can ease into the weighted stretch. So the idea of tearing muscles is unlikely, which is supported by most street lifters and the absence of injury compilation videos. And if there is a problem with the shoulders or sternum, it will be quickly identified even without maxing out, especially for rep work, since that's when most overuse is accumulated. So the pain is not an argument against maxing, it's an argument against one's structure for dips. And you recognize if you're vulnerable to such problems even with high rep bodyweight dips, let alone weighted. So if you feel fine after adding 1 or 2 plates, but suddenly experience pain upon adding a 3rd plate, it's likely because you've altered your form in an ego-driven manner. 9 out of 10 times by aggressively bouncing out of the bottom, shifting side to side, or not protracting your scapula at the top. If you dip with clean technique, you should be able to max out every week, which is entirely feasible with the conjugate system. For example, week 1 could feature a standard weighted dip, week 2 with chains, week 3 pause, and week 4 with bands. Alternatively, you might test your dips sporadically as I often do. Like sometimes I'll go months without doing dips, only to dive into a random workout and give it my all, grinding to the max. I've maintained this habit since 2017, always exceeding 200 pounds and reaching 250 pounds this year. The result? No injuries or strains. Not even once. This resiliency is noteworthy, considering that dips impose more stretch than the bench press, and I've never peaked. Therefore, the real question isn't whether maxing out on dips is problematic, but rather how to maximize the process and determine where the best use cases lie. Which leads me to my second point. The weighted dip is a godly max effort exercise for the bench press, overhead press, and weighted push-up. It perfectly complements all 3, targeting the pecs, anterior delts, and triceps with a high stimulus. And sometimes, depending on one's structure, execution, and weaknesses, it provides more stimulation in one of those muscles, even if the pecs are the primary mover. In my view, the dip serves as a hybrid between a vertical and horizontal press, offering general strength carryover to most pressing exercises. It's so effective that average street lifters who dip 5 plates, and I must emphasize that this is the baseline, as some dip well over 300 pounds, most of the time, they can bench 315 without specifically training for it. And if these athletes begin a powerlifting program or become more familiar with the movement pattern, it's common to see them bench 350 shortly after, and sometimes even 405 if they're freaks. This logic follows. If someone can do a 435-pound total dip, shouldn't their bench press be not far behind, perhaps within a 10% window? Based off absolute loads, it's certainly what we're observing in the real world, and that's not by accident. It's a strong correlation. And while I'm not claiming that dips are the ultimate accessory, like many powerlifters don't like them or find limited transferability at the elite level due to a shift towards specificity, it's likely that for most recreational lifters, incorporating weighted dips will be advantageous in the long run, both in terms of muscular development and enhancing the bench press alongside general strength. And in the realm of max effort, have you considered that this is identical to camber bar benching? The weighted dip is a specialty bar replacement, and it can be included in your rotation to prevent overuse, all while emphasizing the best lengthened position. And if you have limited equipment, or you'd rather not experiment with unusual pressing variations, or perhaps you enjoy sticking to the basics, then you can't go wrong with what's often referred to as the upper body squat. Literally another competition movement. So your wave could be simple and traditional, such as week 1, close grip pause bench, week 2, incline bench, week 3, floor press, week 4, any weighted dip, week 5, OHP, and week 6, reverse grip bench. It's that easy. You mix in the weighted dip somewhere in the middle to blend back or forward. It doesn't even have to be frequent. It reminds me of those who say, don't max out on conventional deadlifts because of stimulus to fatigue. Well, if it's not abused in your general squat and deadlift rotation, why would it ever be a problem? It's not. And even I can be honest about this despite my bad leverages and biases. It's the same with 1 rep max dips. In addition, it's worth noting that if you're struggling with the bottom or top phase of any press, dips can help strengthen both due to coordination and the shifting of your body angles. It tends to slow down past the midpoint, making the lockout comparatively challenging, and maybe that's why dips are such a great triceps builder. In fact, I failed the final arm bend so many times on my way to hitting 5 plates for the first time. Basically, the 1 rep max dip strength curve is demanding both in the beginning since you're in a weak position and towards the end since you bled out all your strength across such a deep range of motion and leverages were modified. So that's why it's hard to pinpoint which area, the chest, shoulders, or triceps, heavy dips destroy the most. To me, it's irrelevant. And while I'm inclined to believe it's primarily for watermelon pecs, everything's gonna get jacked here and is highly engaged. Like your humerus actually doesn't fully adduct unless it's a ring dip, and the shoulder is fully lengthened, plus the absolute load on the triceps, provided you're strong, is equivalent to doing heavy as dumbbell extensions, even if the forearm tilt is minimal. So the muscle biasing is not as important compared to other max effort presses. This is really an all-in-one banger. And in the end, we're simply refining the ability to strain on presses. And why shouldn't we strain on a lift that could be viewed as a part of the Big Five? Like if Marvin Eder was maxing out with 400 pounds in the mid-1900s, keep in mind the current world record holder Matthew's lat lifts about that, and eventually managed to bench 500, then I think weighted dips with half of that should be a doable grind and a safe long-term goal for us dedicated naturals. Just saying. Now, going back to shoulder pain because I want to hit the nail in the coffin. I'm not advising you to do half reps, but technically there's nothing wrong with staying in your active range as long as you are truly doing that and not stopping artificially due to fear. Let your body naturally fall as deeply as possible, then rebound out, wherever that may be. Usually, range of motion will be far deeper than you realize. And if shoulder pain somehow persists after some max effort rotations, my first line of defense is to always use the closest dipping grip possible. Though with regular parallel bars, even for shorter people, it's standardized and narrow enough. So the real contributor to pain here lies with the V-bar handles, which is common in pull-up and dip towers, or even modern dedicated dip stations. It's perplexing because traditionally, parallel bars were most used, and the sport of street lifting, that is also the standard. So if you are restricted to using such bars, like me, who uses the premium sturdy Bells of Steel one that doesn't shake, link in the description box, then you want to grab higher up, so that your hands are closer together within this internal rotation. Now if it's a power rack attachment, grabbing the absolute tip may not be possible, as your chest will hit the edges in the bottom, forcing a middle grip instead. Otherwise, always go as close as you reasonably can without obstructing range of motion, which matters if your arms are not to be 100% neutral by your sides. Also, avoid doing super wide grip dips as a variation. They're simply not worth it unless you are wearing a slingshot. Alternatively, my preferred method is to do reverse grip dips, which is now the only way I dip heavy. While facing away from your station, essentially grabbing upside down, your hands are now externally rotated, which is actually safer on the shoulder joints, much like a reverse grip bench press. It's surprising that more lifters aren't adopting this approach. This method alone can allow a huge percentage of lifters, even the structurally not built kind, to dip heavy, despite having prior sternum and shoulder discomfort. And this is for reps and 1 rep maxes, without any pains or problems. And here, grabbing wider at the tips is possible since the divergence results in slight external rotation. However, if you're still sensitive, just grab the middle, which should resemble a hand placement similar to parallel bars. If this continues hurting, which I highly doubt unless trash form is used or you're cursed, then only max out on dips if you also have access to bands or chains. So a combination like 3 plates with 1 mini band or 3 plates with 30 to 60 pounds of chains, which is my preference, as opposed to doing 4 straight plates, can be used. Deloading the bottom slightly is a game changer and will work the triceps more, making it a great max effort exercise for safety and similar to a regular close grip bench, since a deeper stretch is less intense, which could be a pro depending on your previous rotation and muscular needs. Maybe you did an arch nemesis 1 rep max last week and want to dip now, but don't want to overly stress your pecs. Or you did a pause weighted dip last week and want to dip again for bodyweight specificity. Well, now you can. No need to deviate away from your plan and compromise exercise blending. Finally, in the context of weighted calisthenics, weighted dips are undoubtedly the best max effort exercise available. If you want elite strength and are looking for that one exercise to aid with push-ups, whether weighted or not, including bent arm strength or even handstand push-ups, dips are number 1. Strength is strength. Plus they're easily accessible, and what's the alternative? Wearing a backpack and attempting 1 rep maxes with 15 to 20 10-pound plates? You could try that, and if it's possible, go right ahead. However, I can attest that the setup is extremely cumbersome, and determining the precise 100% load is almost impossible. It's actually more efficient to just aim for low reps, say sets of 5, rather than trying to pinpoint your exact grinding single. Not to mention, this setup might be unstable due to the extra core engagement, and initiating the starting position can be tricky. And then there's the risk with the backpack itself. What if it can't sustain weights past 150 pounds? Or even be loaded that heavily to begin with? Heck, even with the Kenzui weight vest, which I love and use personally, how feasible is it to stack over 4 45-pound plates, having 2 each at the front and back on your own? Compare that to wearing a simple dip belt and suspending plates, be it with a chain, strap, or loading pin, which takes mere seconds, and all you'll need to do then is squeeze the weight tightly with your legs for support, perhaps sidestep onto one box that's not jump, and you are good to go. You tell me what's simpler. So when it comes to heavy weighted calisthenics presses, the weighted dip is our first and best option. Push-ups or handstands can't compare, which is precisely why the sport of street lifting designated weighted dips as the official competition movement. The choice is rooted in decades of lifters maxing out on dips. It's practical and just makes sense. And just think about attempting 1 rep max push-ups with accommodating resistance as a variation. I'm not even going to cover the complexities of that. The thought alone is enough to end off this video. So in conclusion, if your goal is to be a powerhouse in all pressing exercises, both in lifting and calisthenics, consider adding 1 rep max dips into your routine. Just as powerlifters max out on the bench press, you can do the same with weighted dips, especially if you identify as a general strength enthusiast or calisthenics athlete. Committing to this will not only build enduring old school strength, but also sculpt a dense, tough physique. So embrace the upper body squat, share your best PRs down below, and I'll talk to you next time.